Welcome to Silent Queen's Reckoning. I'm so glad you could join us today. Now let's dive right into the story.
Chapter 1. Audrey Vale came home 2 days early and found her husband teaching another woman where the spare key was hidden. She stood outside the kitchen window in the rain, one hand on the handle of her suitcase, the other locked around her phone so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. Inside the house, Marcus Ellison wore her navy linen apron. That should not have hurt as much as it did. It was only fabric, a little faded at the pocket, a smear of flour near the hem from a Sunday when Audrey had tried to bake bread and failed so badly Marcus had laughed until he cried. Back then, the apron had meant ordinary happiness. Now it hung across his chest while he cooked for a woman sitting in Audrey's chair. The woman was young, blonde, and carefully relaxed, the way some people become careless only after 3 mirrors approve it. She wore a pale satin dress under a borrowed cardigan. Audrey recognized the cardigan. She recognized the table. She recognized the bottle of wine. The wine was the Burgundy she had brought home from Beaune and saved for their 15th anniversary, still 8 months away. Marcus had said it was too good for a normal dinner. Apparently betrayal was an occasion. Audrey did not move. Rain slid down the back of her coat and gathered cold beneath her collar. Her flight from Milan had landed at dawn after her final panel was cancelled. She had imagined walking in quietly making coffee, surprising Marcus before he left for his office. She had bought him a leather notebook at the airport because he once said he missed writing ideas by hand. The notebook sat in her suitcase now, useless and expensive. Marcus leaned toward the woman and said something Audrey could not hear through the glass. The woman laughed. Her laugh was high and intimate, the kind of sound that had already decided it belonged in the room. Then she turned her head, and the pendant light struck her ears. Audrey stopped breathing. Emerald drops. Her emerald drops. The earrings had belonged to her mother. Audrey had searched for them for 3 weeks. Marcus had helped. He had checked drawers, coat pockets, the safe, and then gently suggested she was exhausted from work and probably misplaced them during travel. Now they swung against another woman's neck. Marcus reached into his pocket. For 1 second, Audrey thought it would be a ring. She felt the thought pass through her like a small blade, sharp and humiliating. It was not a ring. It was worse. A key. Plain brass. Newly cut. Attached to a silver ring. The woman pressed both hands to her mouth, delighted. Marcus placed the key in her palm. She kissed it. Then she stood, caught the tie of Audrey's apron, and pulled him down to kiss him. Marcus kissed her back without hesitation. That was when Audrey began recording. 42 seconds. The apron. The chair. The wine. The earrings. The key. The kiss. She recorded until the woman rested her forehead against Marcus's and whispered something that made him close his eyes as if grateful to be understood. Audrey lowered the phone before either of them looked toward the window. For a moment she wanted to walk in. She imagined the door opening. Their faces. The gasp. The dramatic satisfaction of smashing the moment with the truth. But Audrey was an architect. She had spent 20 years learning that structures fail when people remove the wrong beam too quickly. So she did not open the door. She walked backward down the stone path she had designed herself, past the rain-dark lavender, past the low garden wall, past the front steps of the house Marcus liked to call ours at parties though his name had never been on the deed. At the curb, a black cab slowed. The driver rolled down his window. "Need a ride, ma'am?" Audrey looked back once. Warm gold light filled the kitchen. Marcus touched the woman's cheek as if she were something precious. The woman slipped the key into her small white purse. Audrey opened the cab door. "Yes," she said. "I do." Chapter 2. Audrey did not go to a hotel. She went to Elise Marlowe. Elise had been her closest friend since their first year at the Royal College of Art, back when Audrey wore black turtlenecks to hide nerves and Elise wore red lipstick to start fights with professors. Now Elise designed boutique hotels, smoked only when furious, and owned a townhouse where every room looked like a beautiful argument. She opened the door at 9 in the morning wearing a silk robe and holding a mug of coffee. One look at Audrey's wet hair and suitcase was enough. "Oh," Elise said. "Whose body are we hiding emotionally?" Audrey held out her phone. Elise's face changed. She stepped aside. "Come in." In the kitchen, Audrey stood without removing her coat while Elise watched the video. Once. Then again. On the third viewing, Elise paused on the woman's earrings. "Those are Eliza's emeralds." Audrey nodded. Elise set the phone down with extraordinary care, as if violence might otherwise come through her fingertips. "Who is she?" "I do not know yet." "Yet," Elise repeated. Audrey finally unbuttoned her coat. Elise poured coffee into a blue mug and pushed it toward her. Drink. Then tell me what else is wrong. Audrey looked up. Elise's voice softened. You would have gone inside if it were only an affair. That was why Audrey had come here. Elise knew how to identify the room behind the room. Audrey sat at the kitchen island. For the past 6 months, Marcus had been unusually interested in Harborline Commons. Harborline Commons was the project that had made Audrey's name and consumed the last 5 years of her life. It was an abandoned freight corridor along the Western River, 38 acres of rusted rail, empty warehouses, flood-damaged lots, and a closed ferry terminal. Audrey's firm, Vale Atelier, had designed a plan to turn it into a mixed district with affordable housing, a public library, a clinic, artist studios, winter gardens, flood barriers, a market hall, and a pedestrian bridge connecting 2 neighborhoods that had been separated by industry for generations. It was not just a development. It was a repair. The land belonged to Ashbourne Trust, Audrey's family trust. The first funding release required Audrey's personal approval. The public launch was in 6 days. And Marcus, who was not an architect, not a trustee, not a designer, and not authorized to select vendors, had recently begun asking questions about the creative direction, the investor dinner, the press packet, and whether the trust could release funds faster if the public response was strong. At the time, Audrey thought he wanted to feel included. Now she knew inclusion was not what he wanted. Access was. Elise listened without interrupting. By the end, her coffee had gone untouched. Who handles your legal work? Clara Whitcomb. Call her. It is Saturday. Elise stared at her. Audrey called. Clara answered on the 4th ring, voice crisp and awake. Tell me whether this is blood, money, or marriage. Possibly all 3, Audrey said. She sent the video. Clara called back in 4 minutes. Do not confront Marcus. I did not. Do not threaten the woman. I will not. Do not move funds while angry. I know. I am saying it because brilliant women become theatrical when betrayed. Audrey nearly smiled. Then she told Clara about Harborline Commons, the launch agenda Marcus had been pushing, and his recent interest in trust release procedures. Clara stopped making small sounds of acknowledgement. When Audrey finished, the line was quiet for 3 seconds. This is not adultery, Clara said. No. It is a project capture attempt hiding under adultery. That is what I was afraid of. Good. Fear is useful when it makes you document instead of explode. Elise mouthed, I love her. Clara continued. I need every email, every vendor draft, every calendar invitation, every message where he discusses the launch or trust funds. Call Nina at your office. Tell her to preserve records before he realizes you know. Nina Frost was Vale Atelier's finance director. She had the emotional range of a locked safe and the instincts of a forensic accountant. Audrey called her next. Nina answered by saying, I wondered when you would call about Marcus. Audrey went still. What did you find? An unauthorized vendor draft. Routed through his assistant. New creative partner for Harborline. Ridiculous fee. Ridiculous language. Send it. 30 seconds later, Audrey opened the file. Sable Room Creative. Founder, Livia St. James. Scope, emotional positioning, lifestyle identity, investor warmth, residential desirability, launch narrative. Proposed fee, $890,000. Attached was a revised launch program. Opening remarks, Audrey Vale. Capital Vision, Marcus Ellison. Creative Future, Livia St. James. Trust Release Acknowledgement, Audrey Vale. Audrey read the last line twice. Trust Release Acknowledgement. There it was. The key to the real door. Marcus wanted Audrey on stage. He wanted her to appear generous, modern, collaborative, calm. He wanted to introduce his mistress as a creative partner in front of investors, press, trustees, city officials, and nonprofit leaders. Once the room applauded, refusal would become a scandal. He had mistaken her silence for fear of appearing difficult. That mistake would cost him more than he knew. Chapter 3 The Mistress had a name by noon. Livia St. James. 32. Former luxury hotel consultant. Founder of Sable Room Creative, incorporated 10 months earlier. Blonde, photogenic, and fluent in the language of people who confuse candles with strategy. Her website described her work as architecture for desire. Audrey stared at the phrase for a long time. Elise leaned over her shoulder. Do not let bad copy be the thing that kills you. Architecture for desire, Audrey repeated. I know. Architecture requires load calculations. Yes. Desire usually does not survive an invoice audit. Elise smiled grimly. There she is. Livia's social media was not difficult to search. People who enjoy being chosen often leave breadcrumbs because the secret is useless if no one can smell it. A photograph of a man's hand pouring wine. Marcus's watch visible. A hotel mirror selfie in a robe Audrey recognized from a resort where Marcus had claimed to attend a private finance retreat. A close-up of emerald earrings with the caption, "Old Stones, New Story." Elise swore under her breath. Audrey saved everything. Then she clicked a photo from 3 weeks earlier. Livia stood in front of a scale model. The image was cropped tightly, but Audrey recognized the corner of the Harborline Commons model. The library skylight, the bridge support, the flood garden curve she had redrawn 14 times. Livia's caption read, "Some projects choose you before the world knows your name." Audrey felt the room tilt. Elise touched her arm. "Audrey." She enlarged the photo. Behind Livia, reflected faintly in glass, stood Marcus. Not at the house. At Vale Atelier. After hours. In Audrey's studio. Audrey sent the image to Clara and Nina. Nina replied first. "Checking entry logs now." Clara replied second. "Preserve. Do not breathe fire yet." Audrey sat back. For the first time that day, grief rose so quickly she had to close her eyes. The kitchen had hurt because it was intimate. The studio hurt because it was sacred. Vale Atelier was not a vanity firm. It had started in one rented room over a bakery, with Audrey drawing library renovations on a door laid across 2 filing cabinets because she could not afford a proper drafting table. Marcus came later, charming and useful at opening nights, proud to be near her work when it made other people admire him. Over time, she gave him a small equity position in the business. Not because he earned it, because she loved him and thought sharing was proof of trust. Now he had brought Livia into the studio after hours to photograph herself beside a project she did not design, inside a firm she did not build, for a future she intended to occupy. Audrey went to Elise's sink and splashed cold water on her wrists. When she returned, her face had changed. Elise noticed. "What are you thinking?" Audrey looked at the laptop. "He is going to expect me home tomorrow night." "Yes. I am going home tonight." Elise opened her mouth. Audrey lifted a hand. Not to confront him. To perform ignorance. Elise slowly closed her mouth. "Clara will have the records. Nina will lock down access. I need him comfortable enough to walk into the launch with her." "That is cold." "No," Audrey said. "Cold is giving another woman my mother's earrings and calling it a new story." At 6 that evening, Audrey returned to her house through the front door. Marcus was in the hall. He had changed clothes. The kitchen smelled of lemon cleaner. The apron was gone. The wine bottle was gone. The extra place setting had vanished. He looked so relieved to see her that, for a second, Audrey understood why betrayal fooled people. Relief could imitate love if you wanted it badly enough. "Audrey," he said, "you're early." Last panel was cancelled. He crossed the hall and kissed her cheek. His mouth was warm. Audrey did not flinch. "How was Milan?" "Crowded. Useful. You should have called. I would have picked you up. I wanted to surprise you." Something moved behind his eyes. "Did you?" She smiled faintly. "I suppose I did." He took her suitcase and carried it upstairs, narrating his day with too much detail. A board call. A late lunch. A long run he had not taken. The cleaner coming by early. Audrey listened. That night, Marcus slept beside her with his phone under his pillow. Audrey lay awake, one hand resting on the sheet between them, not touching him. She did not think about the kiss. She thought about the revised launch agenda. Architecture teaches you that collapse is rarely sudden. Cracks appear first. Doors stick. Water stains spread. A floor slopes by half an inch. People ignore warning signs because the building still stands. Her marriage had been leaning for years. Now she finally knew where to place the brace, where to make the cut, and which wall had to come down. Chapter 4. For 4 days, Audrey lived with Marcus as if she knew nothing. She made coffee. She answered his questions. She kissed his cheek when he left for the office. She sat across from him at dinner and watched him build a false room around them plank by plank. He was tender in small bursts. That was the worst part. He brought her tea while she worked. He asked if Milan exhausted her. He put his hand on her shoulder as he passed behind her chair. Each gesture arrived carrying a hidden invoice. On Tuesday morning, he mentioned Livia. He did it over toast. The casualness was so rehearsed, Audrey nearly admired the craft. "There is someone I think you should meet before the launch," he said. Audrey spread marmalade on her toast. "Someone?" "A creative consultant." Livia St. James. She has an interesting eye. For what? Atmosphere. Positioning. Emotional language. Audrey looked up. Harborline already has language. It has your language. And? Marcus smiled. You are brilliant, AUD. No one disputes that. But sometimes brilliance can feel severe to people who do not know how to enter it. There it was. The old wound he liked to press with clean hands. Severe. Difficult. Intimidating. Words used for women whose standards inconvenience men. Audrey set down her knife. The project is not a hotel lounge. Of course not. It is public infrastructure. Yes, and public infrastructure still needs desire. She looked at him. He looked away first. His phone lit up on the table. Livia. He flipped it over. Too late. Audrey sipped her coffee. Investor? She asked. Marcus smiled thinly. Potential one. Later that day, Nina sent the internal access logs. Marcus had used his spouse and shareholder credentials to enter Vale Atelier after hours 7 times in the previous 2 months. Livia's face appeared on visitor footage 3 times. On one night, they entered the project archive room at 10:42 p.m. and left at 12:13 a.m. Nina wrote, I have restricted his access to non-critical areas, but left enough visible permissions that he will not notice yet. Audrey replied, perfect. Clara sent a second packet. Payment trail. Hotel suite. Jewelry purchase. Car service. Consulting meals. Designer clothing charged through a shell vendor whose invoices were passed to Marcus's office as launch hospitality. Total, $418,600 connected directly or indirectly to Harborline adjacent accounts. Audrey printed every page. Paper mattered. Screens made people argue. Paper sat on tables like a fact with weight. On Wednesday evening, Marcus came home with a bottle of champagne. Pre-launch nerves, he said. Thought we could celebrate. Audrey looked at the label. Not from their cellar. Good. She accepted a glass but did not drink. Marcus stood by the window, looking out over the garden. You know, he said, after Harborline lands, everything changes. For whom? For us. Audrey watched his reflection in the glass. He smiled at the future he thought he had arranged. We could be more than a design office. We could be a movement. Development, lifestyle, hospitality, branded living. You have always thought too small about your own work. Small, Audrey repeated. You know what I mean. You care about benches and clinics and library entrances. That is noble. But there is another level. Luxury. Aspiration, he corrected. She thought of Livia sitting in her chair, wearing her mother's earrings. Aspiration was one word for wanting what another woman built. Audrey placed her untouched champagne on the table. Marcus, she said, why did you marry me? He turned, surprised by the softness of the question. Because I loved you. Loved? Love, he corrected quickly. I love you. What did you love? He laughed uneasily. What kind of question is that? An old one. He studied her, searching for danger. She gave him none. You were unlike anyone I knew, he said at last. Focused. Elegant. So certain about what mattered. Being near you made the world feel designed instead of random. For 1 second, grief touched her. That answer might even have been true. Then he added, but sometimes it is exhausting living inside another person's certainty. There it was again. The complaint of a man who loved the shelter until he resented the roof. Audrey nodded. Thank you for telling me. He smiled, relieved, not realizing he had just handed her another structural note. Chapter 5 The Harborline Commons launch took place inside the old ferry terminal. Audrey had fought to hold it there. The investors wanted a hotel ballroom. Marcus wanted a private club with better lighting. Livia, according to the leaked draft, had suggested a velvet-draped warehouse and immersive scent moment. Audrey chose the ferry terminal because it told the truth. The roof still bore patched steel. The brick walls were cleaned, but not disguised. Old departure boards hung above the eastern entrance. Beyond the tall temporary glass, the river moved dark under a cold spring sky. At the center of the hall stood the Harborline model under museum lights. Tiny trees. Tiny roof gardens. Tiny ramps leading to a library atrium. A clinic beside the market hall. Residential buildings angled to protect winter sun. A pedestrian bridge arcing over the old rail trench like a question finally answered. By 7, the terminal had filled with trustees, investors, city officials, neighborhood leaders, journalists, engineers, architects, and the kind of people who could smell both money and scandal from across a room. Audrey wore a white suit with clean lines and no jewelry except a narrow gold watch. Elise looked her over and said, You look like due process with cheekbones. Audrey nearly laughed. Nina stood near the production table with 2 tablets and the calm menace of a woman who had backups for her backups. Clara positioned herself near the side wall. Samuel Reed, Audrey's senior partner, watched the entrance. Samuel had silver hair, a quiet voice, and a permanent limp from a construction site accident in his 30s. He had helped Audrey draw Harborline when the land was still considered unsalvageable and banks laughed at their flood mitigation model. At 7:18, Marcus arrived. With Livia. He should have known better. He did not. Livia wore deep green silk. The emerald earrings swung from her ears. A murmur moved through Audrey's team, too soft for guests but sharp enough to cut. Elise leaned toward Audrey. I have never had to work so hard not to remove jewelry from a person. Audrey did not look away from Livia. Marcus guided her through the room with one hand at her back. Not quite touching, then removing his hand when a camera turned. Too late. The photographer caught it. Good. Livia approached Audrey first. Audrey, she said, smiling with the bright confidence of a woman rehearsed in another woman's mirror. I have admired your work for years. Audrey looked at the earrings. Clearly. Livia's smile faltered. Marcus stepped in. There you are. There I am, Audrey said. Tonight matters, Marcus said softly. Let's keep it generous. Generosity requires consent. His eyes tightened. Before he could answer, the program began. Samuel took the stage first. He spoke about site repair, flood resilience, and why public space must be designed before profit is calculated. Nina followed with the funding structure. A councilwoman spoke about housing commitments. A neighborhood organizer named Denise Alvarez spoke about growing up beside a fenced-off river she was not allowed to reach. The room listened. Then Marcus walked to the microphone. He looked handsome under the lights. Navy suit. White shirt. No tie. Carefully casual authority. Thank you, he began. Harborline Commons is more than architecture. It is a new emotional identity for our city. Elise whispered, I need a drink and a lawyer. Audrey kept her eyes on Marcus. He praised the team. He praised the trust. He praised the public partners. Then his voice warmed. But great visions must evolve. They need new language, new intimacy, new ways to help people imagine not only where they live, but who they become when they live there. Tonight, I am proud to introduce someone whose creative voice will help Harborline speak to the future. Livia stepped forward. Marcus smiled at her. Livia St. James. Audrey moved before Livia reached the stage. She climbed the 3 steps and crossed to Marcus. The room quieted. Marcus's smile stayed in place, but his eyes changed. Audrey took the microphone from his hand. Thank you, Marcus, she said. Since we are introducing new voices, we should also introduce the documents that brought them here. Chapter 6. The screen behind Audrey changed. The riverfront rendering disappeared. A contract draft appeared in its place. Sable Room Creative. Proposed fee, $890,000. Emotional positioning. Lifestyle identity. Investor warmth. Launch narrative. Residential desirability. For a second, no one moved. Then the room began to understand that this was not part of the program. Marcus took 1 step toward her. Audrey. She did not look at him. This draft contract was routed through Marcus Ellison's office without authorization from Vale Atelier's Executive Committee, Ashbourne Trust, or the Harborline Governance Board. An investor at table 2 leaned forward. A journalist lifted a recorder. Livia looked from the screen to Marcus. You said this was approved, she whispered. The microphone caught every word. Marcus did not answer her. Audrey clicked the remote. A second slide appeared. Sable Room Creative Incorporation date. 10 months earlier. Related expenses. Hotel suite. Private travel. Car service. Luxury wardrobe. Jewelry purchase. Consulting meals. Total routed through Harborline adjacent vendor channels. $418,600. Livia's fingers rose involuntarily to the emerald earrings. Half the room saw it. Elise murmured from the front row, that is the first honest gesture she has made all night. Marcus moved closer. This is wildly inappropriate. Audrey turned to him. You brought your mistress to my project. I brought the paperwork. The sentence moved through the terminal like a physical thing. Someone gasped. Someone else said, oh my God. Clara stepped onto the stage, charcoal suit immaculate, expression calm. My name is Clara Whitcomb. I represent Audrey Vale, Vale Atelier, and Ashbourne Trust. Formal notices have been prepared. No trust funds will be released under any vendor structure involving Sable Room Creative. All Harborline adjacent accounts connected to Mr. Ellison's office are under audit. Marcus's face had gone pale under the lights. Audrey clicked again. A still image appeared. Marcus in Audrey's kitchen, wearing her apron. Livia in Audrey's chair. The emerald earrings visible. The brass key in Livia's hand. The kiss. The room held its breath. Audrey faced the audience. This is not a presentation about my marriage. My marriage does not deserve this many witnesses. This is a presentation about attempted vendor capture, unauthorized financial routing, conflict of interest, and pressure around a trust release tied to a public development. Marcus leaned toward the microphone. Audrey, stop. She looked at him. My house. My studio. My mother's earrings. My project. My trust. At what point, Marcus, were you planning to ask before handing pieces of my life to someone else? Livia's eyes filled with panic. Audrey had expected satisfaction. Instead, she felt something colder and more useful. Distance. Marcus tried to recover by turning to the room. Everyone can see this as a personal matter being weaponized because my wife is emotional. A shift passed across the audience. Not agreement. Warning. Audrey smiled faintly. Careful, Marcus. Emotional women often keep excellent records. She clicked again. An email appeared. From Marcus Ellison to Livia St. James. Subject, launch timing. Once Audrey hears applause, she will not refuse the release. She hates looking rigid in public. Make the transition feel inevitable. I will handle the old guard. The room went cold. Samuel Reed stood slowly from the front row. For the record, he said, the old guard is awake. A nervous laugh broke and died. Caroline Ashbourne, chair of the trust committee, rose next. She was 76, white-haired, and had the terrifying grace of a woman who could end a multi-million-dollar deal without raising her voice. Ashbourne Trust confirms Ms. Vale's sole authority over the first funding release. Any claim that Mr. Ellison may approve, influence, or condition that release is false. A city official asked, does Harborline continue? Audrey answered without hesitation. Yes. The land is secure. The permits are active. The funding remains available under proper governance. Tonight is not a collapse. She looked at Marcus. It is a correction. Chapter 7. Livia made the mistake of speaking. That was predictable. People who build themselves out of performance usually reach for performance when the floor shifts. This is humiliating, Livia said, voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. You are using a professional event to punish a private relationship. Audrey turned toward her. A private relationship does not invoice a public redevelopment project. Livia opened her mouth. No words came. Marcus took the microphone from the stand. This is a hostile ambush. Audrey is under enormous pressure. Anyone who knows her knows she has become increasingly controlling around Harborline. Nina spoke from the production table, not into a microphone but clearly enough. The woman who designed it controlling it is not suspicious. Several people turned. Marcus's jaw tightened. Clara lifted a document. For clarity, Mr. Ellison's access to Harborline files has been suspended pending audit. Vale Atelier's board will meet tomorrow morning regarding his equity position under the conduct clause. Marcus stared at Audrey. You cannot freeze me out of a firm I helped build. Audrey looked at him for a long moment. You helped choose the reception desk after we won the first library commission. The line landed with brutal neatness. Elise did not even try to hide her laugh. Audrey continued. You were given a minority stake because I mistook intimacy for alignment. That sentence hurt more than she expected. Not because of Marcus. Because of the younger woman inside her who had signed those papers happily, believing marriage meant sharing the structures that kept her safe. She had not known then that some people accept keys and later call themselves architects. Marcus's face hardened. You think you are noble because you build clinics and libraries? You are impossible to live with. You turn every room into a moral exam. Audrey felt the old sting. There it was. The reason he had chosen Livia, or at least the reason he used when explaining himself to himself. Livia made desire easy. Audrey made responsibility visible. One felt like applause. The other required a spine. Audrey looked at the audience. I apologize for the interruption to tonight's program. Harborline Commons will proceed with its original design, original governance, and original public commitments. Anyone who requires legal documentation may speak with Ms. Whitcomb. Anyone who came to discuss the actual project, the model remains open. Then she stepped away from the microphone. Marcus followed her off stage. He should not have. People who lose power in public often chase private leverage down narrow corridors. Audrey walked through the side door into the service hall. The air smelled of cold metal, dust, and raincoats. Behind the wall, the event shifted into chaos. Journalists calling editors, investors speaking with Clara, trustees comparing documents, guests whispering over the still image of the kitchen. Marcus caught up near the freight elevator. Audrey. She kept walking. Stop. She turned. Under fluorescent light, Marcus looked older. Not because time had passed, but because the room had stopped lending him glamour. What do you want? She asked. He laughed once, brittle and furious. What I want? I want my wife to stop destroying our life in public. Our life? 13 years, Audrey. Does that mean nothing? Betrayers became historians after discovery. They brought years to the table like receipts, hoping duration could discount damage. It meant enough that I did not walk into the kitchen with a camera in your face, she said. His expression flickered. You saw. I recorded. He dragged a hand through his hair. Livia was a mistake. She had my key. It was symbolic. It opened a door. His mouth tightened. She was wearing my mother's earrings. I panicked. You panic with jewelry often? His face flushed. You're enjoying this. No. I am competent at this. That is different. For a moment, pain crossed his face, and some old reflex in Audrey almost reached toward it. Almost. Audrey, he said softly, do you have any idea what it felt like being married to you? Everyone sees you. Everyone praises your mind, your taste, your principles. In every room, I became the husband beside Audrey Vale. There it was. Not love. Not lust. Envy. Marcus had not wanted a mistress because she was extraordinary. He wanted someone beside whom he could feel large without building anything. Audrey's success had become a mirror he did not like. I would have made room for you, she said. I know. His honesty arrived too late. Then why? Because I did not want room. I wanted the room. The corridor seemed to still. Audrey felt that sentence settle into place like a final measurement. Thank you, she said. He frowned. For what? For naming the load-bearing wall. The elevator opened. Elise stood inside holding Audrey's coat. She looked at Marcus. I'd suggest you take the stairs, but that implies effort. Audrey stepped into the elevator. Marcus did not follow. Chapter 8 The next morning. Vale Atelier's boardroom filled before 9. The table was long, pale oak, designed by Audrey in the firm's second year because she hated boardrooms that made collaboration feel like sentencing. Today, sentencing seemed appropriate. Present were Audrey, Samuel, Nina, Clara, 2 outside directors, Caroline Ashbourne for the trust, Marcus, and Marcus's attorney, a man named Peter Alton, who looked as though he had slept in his suit and regretted choosing law. Livia did not attend. Her attorney sent documents instead. Many documents. Emails. Texts. Draft invoices. A voice memo in which Marcus said, Audrey designs beautiful guilt. I am trying to make Harborline sellable to people who do not want to live inside her conscience. Audrey listened to the recording once. Then again. Not because it surprised her. Because it explained why he had never understood the project. Harborline was not designed to flatter buyers into feeling ethical. It was designed so a child could cross a bridge to a library without walking beside a 6-lane road. It was designed so an elderly tenant could reach a clinic in winter. It was designed so a city stopped treating a river as scenery for the wealthy and a barrier for everyone else. Marcus heard conscience and thought branding problem. Peter Alton opened with a familiar strategy. Mr. Ellison acknowledges personal misconduct. However, Ms. Vale's public exposure of marital issues created reputational harm and a hostile environment for a minority shareholder. Clara smiled. Peter noticed and became less confident. Clara said, the reputational harm began when your client attempted to install his romantic partner as a vendor in a trust-funded development without authorization. That is disputed. Nina turned on the screen. It was not disputed for long. She presented the payment trail. Hotel invoices. Travel routes. Vendor shells. After-hours studio entry logs. Draft contract approvals routed through Marcus's office. Screenshots from Livia's social media, showing restricted models and documents in the background. Then Samuel spoke. He did not raise his voice. Marcus used his position at Vale Atelier to create the illusion of authority over Harborline. That illusion was presented to investors, staff, and an outside vendor. It endangered the project. Caroline followed. Ashbourne Trust will not release funds under any structure in which Marcus Ellison has access, approval rights, or vendor influence. One outside director asked Marcus directly, "Did you intend to pressure Audrey into approving Sable Room Creative during the launch?" Marcus looked at Audrey. She looked back. Peter touched his arm. Marcus said nothing. The silence was enough. At last Audrey spoke. "You tried to use my marriage, my house, my mother's jewelry, and my project to manufacture public inevitability. You believed if enough people watched you hand Livia a role, I would sign rather than appear rigid. You forgot something." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "I have been called difficult by better men for better reasons." Samuel looked down. Nina did not hide her smile. The vote was unanimous. Marcus's firm access was revoked. His equity rights were frozen pending buyout review. All Harborline-related files moved to a clean governance archive. His name was removed from launch materials by noon. When the meeting ended, Marcus remained seated. "You will regret turning me into your enemy," he said. Audrey picked up her folder. "No, Marcus. I regret turning you into my partner." Chapter 9. Livia returned the earrings through her attorney. They arrived in a velvet box inside a padded envelope, along with the brass key wrapped in tissue paper. No note. Good. Audrey did not need any more words from her. Still, she stared at the emeralds for a long time. They looked smaller than she remembered. Not less beautiful, just less powerful. Objects often shrink after surviving the wrong hands. Elise sat across from her at the kitchen table, wearing paint-stained jeans and holding a sample card. "You know we need to repaint this room." Audrey closed the jewelry box. "Do we?" "Yes. The walls have witnessed foolishness. They require discipline." That almost made Audrey smile. The old kitchen had been pale gray, chosen during a period when she believed restraint could make a house peaceful. Elise proposed a deep moss green that made the garden appear closer through the windows. Audrey approved it. The apron went into the trash. The anniversary wine glasses were boxed for donation. The chair facing the garden stayed. Elise objected. "That chair is trauma. That chair is mine." "Fine. We reupholster it." Audrey agreed. Changing the room did not erase betrayal. Paint could not disinfect memory. But space mattered. A room could hold fear too long if no one taught it another color. The divorce moved quickly after discovery began. Not because Marcus became noble. Because he became afraid. The house belonged to Audrey. Purchased before marriage through Ashbourne Trust. Renovated with her money. Maintained by her accounts. Marcus had contributed opinions about drawer pulls and later called it our place when donors admired the garden. He initially demanded a settlement large enough to repair his pride. Clara sent the kitchen video, studio entry logs, vendor files, trust documents, and Livia's attorney packet. His demands became smaller. Then smaller. At mediation, Marcus wore a gray suit and the expression of a man trying to appear wounded without seeming guilty. Audrey sat beside Clara with a folder closed in front of her. The mediator, a retired judge named Helen March, reviewed the preliminary terms. Buyout of minority equity at adjusted valuation pending misconduct review. No claim against Ashbourne Trust assets. No claim against the residents. No contact with Harborline staff except through counsel. Mutual non-disparagement limited by truthful legal disclosure. Marcus looked at Audrey. "So this is it?" Audrey met his eyes. "Yes. 13 years, and you say yes like signing for a package." For a moment, the room went quiet. Audrey felt the old pull of guilt. Then she remembered the key in Livia's palm. 13 years did not keep you from giving another woman access to my home." Marcus looked away first. At the end of the session, he lingered in the hallway. "Audrey." Clara paused beside her. Audrey said, "It is fine." Marcus looked thinner, less polished. Consequences had not humbled him fully, but they had at least interrupted his lighting. "I did love you," he said. She believed him in the limited way one believes a person who loved what he could receive and resented what it cost. "I know." His eyes filled with something like relief. She added, "That was not enough to make you safe." The relief vanished. Audrey walked away. Outside, rain fell lightly over the courthouse steps. For the first time since the kitchen window, the rain did not feel like a witness. It felt like weather. Chapter 10. Harborline Commons broke ground 8 months later. The ceremony took place on a cold, bright morning beside the river. Workers stood near the first cleared section of land. City officials came with short speeches because Audrey insisted on the word short in every planning email. Neighborhood families arrived with children, coffee, and guarded hope. The press came for scandal and stayed because the project itself had finally become more interesting than the people who tried to steal it. Audrey wore boots in the mud and a black wool coat. No emeralds. No stage lighting. No lifestyle consultant. She stood in front of the crowd and spoke for 6 minutes. This land has been treated as a leftover, she said. After industry. After shipping. After use. After care. We are not here to cover that history with luxury language. We are here to repair it without pretending repair is simple. She looked toward the river. A city teaches people what they deserve through space. A locked gate teaches exclusion. A dark underpass teaches fear. A bench with a divider teaches someone not to rest. A library with glass doors teaches a child that knowledge is allowed to be visible. Samuel lowered his head. Nina wiped one eye and pretended it was wind. Elise wore enormous sunglasses and did not bother pretending. Audrey continued. Harborline will teach connection. It will teach shelter. It will teach that beautiful spaces are not rewards for wealth, but responsibilities of design. When she lifted the ceremonial shovel, the soil resisted. She liked that. Real beginnings should push back. Afterward, a journalist asked about Marcus. Audrey answered once. Mr. Ellison is not connected to Harborline Commons. Another asked whether Livia St. James had reached out. Audrey's expression cooled. This project is not a society column. That line ended the questions. The first building to rise was not the luxury residential tower. It was the library. Investors argued. Of course they did. Residential units would sell faster. Retail leases would generate earlier revenue. The library could wait, they said, not unkindly, but with the impatience of people trained to confuse delay with prudence. Audrey brought models, financial projections, press analysis, grant schedules, trust obligations, and one large aerial map showing the distance between the nearest public library and the two neighborhoods Harborline would connect. Then she said, if the first completed building is private, the whole district introduces itself incorrectly. The room went quiet. Samuel added, she is right. Nina added, the numbers also agree with her, which is always convenient. The library went first. Competence had its own form of persuasion. During construction, Audrey spent more time on site than anyone expected. She checked stair widths. She argued about tile texture. She stood in the half-built atrium during a storm to hear how rain sounded against the temporary roof. She moved a reading room window by 18 inches because morning light hit the wrong part of the floor. One contractor told Samuel she was intense. Samuel replied, yes, that is why the building will not leak. Audrey heard about it later and laughed for the first time in days. At home, the green kitchen slowly became hers again. At first she avoided the window after dark. Then she stood there deliberately each night, tea in hand, looking out at the garden until the memory lost its teeth. The reupholstered chair returned from Elise's workshop in a deep blue fabric. Audrey placed it facing the garden and sat there the same evening with soup, bread, and a stack of drawings. No hidden phone. No false voice upstairs. No perfume on towels. Quiet entered the house awkwardly at first, like a guest unsure whether it had been invited. Then it settled. By winter, Audrey no longer listened for Marcus's car. By spring, she forgot the sound of his keys in the door. That felt like betrayal of a different kind. Then it felt like mercy. Chapter 11. 1 year after the night in the rain, Audrey walked through the unfinished Harborline Library alone. The building was not beautiful, yet in the way donors understood beauty. The walls were framed. The concrete floor held chalk marks. Plastic sheeting moved softly in the draft. Dust floated in shafts of morning light beneath the unfinished skylight. To Audrey, it was already magnificent. Buildings were most honest before finishes. Before paint and signage, before polished stone, before people used words like iconic and transformative. At this stage, a building revealed its bones. Audrey stood in the central atrium and looked up. The skylight opening was exactly where she had drawn it 5 years earlier. Morning sun fell in a clean rectangle on the floor, touching the future spot where children would sit during story hour. For a moment, she saw herself outside the kitchen window again. Suitcase beside her ankle. Rain in her hair. Phone in her hand. Watching Marcus give away a key to a house he had never truly owned. She wanted to go back and tell that woman something. Not that she would win. Winning was too small. She wanted to tell her that betrayal does not only break a life. Sometimes it reveals the engineering. What had been carrying too much? What had never been anchored? What looked elegant but could not bear weight? What needed to be removed before the whole structure failed? Footsteps sounded behind her. Audrey turned. Samuel entered first, followed by Nina, Elise, Clara, and half the design team. Elise carried a small wooden box. Audrey looked suspicious immediately. "What is this?" Elise said, "A harmless gathering, which means you should worry." Nina took the box and opened it. Inside lay a brass key. Audrey went still. Elise saw her face and said quickly, "Good key." "Excellent key. 0 Mistress content." Samuel smiled. "It is the first key to the library." Audrey stared at it. One key had marked the moment someone tried to replace her inside her own life. This one opened a public room. She took it carefully. It was heavier than it looked. Her throat tightened. No tears came at first. Then one did. Elise looked away with exaggerated dignity. Audrey laughed, and the sound moved upward through the unfinished atrium, light and unfamiliar. Clara said, "For the record, I approve of this key." Nina added, "I have already logged it properly." "Of course you have," Audrey said. They stood together in the dust and light, not as an audience to her pain, but as witnesses to the fact that something useful had been built after it. That afternoon, Audrey returned to the house. The garden was wet from rain. The kitchen glowed green and warm. The blue chair waited by the window. The house no longer felt like a scene of discovery. It felt like a place she had chosen again. She made tea, sat down, and placed the library key on the table. Beside it, she set her mother's emerald earrings. For months she had not worn them. Not because they belonged to Livia now. They never had. Because Audrey needed to remember that reclaiming something did not mean rushing it back onto her body as proof. That evening, she put them on. She looked at herself in the window reflection. Older than the woman who had stood in the rain. Sharper. Softer too, in places Marcus had not known how to value. The earrings caught the light. This time, they looked exactly their size. Chapter 12. The library opened the following autumn. Children came first. Audrey had asked the city to arrange the ribbon cutting that way. Not donors, not trustees, not developers holding scissors too large for sincerity. Children from the 2 nearest schools walked across the new pedestrian bridge in a line of bright coats, their teachers calling names over the wind. The bridge opened at 9. At 9:07, the first child ran across it. The newspapers used that photograph for days. Audrey stood near the library entrance with Samuel and Elise. The finished building was warm brick, glass, timber, and light. Its doors faced the bridge and the market square. Inside, the central atrium held the morning sun exactly as planned. The children's room was already noisy. The reading steps were full within an hour. A city official gave remarks. Denise Alvarez spoke for the neighborhood coalition. Samuel spoke about the construction team. Then Audrey stepped to the microphone. She had prepared a speech. She did not use most of it. "When I first drew this building," she said, "I thought a library was a place for books. I was wrong, or at least incomplete. A library is a public promise. It says you may come in without buying anything. You may sit without being profitable. You may learn without permission. You may be quiet without disappearing." The crowd settled. Audrey looked beyond them to the bridge, the river, the old freight lines preserved as dark tracks in the pavement. There was a time in my life when I confused access with love. I thought giving someone a key meant they understood the value of the room. But a key is only metal. It does not create respect. It does not create loyalty. It does not make a person worthy of entry. Elise lowered her sunglasses. Audrey continued. What creates a home, a project, a city, or a life worth entering is care. Accountability. Memory. Boundaries. The willingness to repair what has been neglected and protect what should never have been used carelessly. She touched the brass library key resting on the podium. This key opens a public door. That matters to me. Because some doors should be guarded carefully, and some should be opened wide. Wisdom is learning the difference. The applause rose slowly, then warmly, then fully. Audrey stepped back. For the first time, she felt no need to look for Marcus in the crowd. He was not there. Or perhaps he was somewhere near the back, smaller than memory, watching a life continue without him. It did not matter. Livia was not there either. Later, Audrey would hear that Sable Room Creative had dissolved after several brands withdrew from pending partnerships. Livia had moved to another city and rebranded herself as a private consultant. Marcus had taken a position at a smaller development advisory firm, one that kept him far from public trust projects and closer to the administrative work he once considered beneath him. Audrey did not celebrate. Collapse was not always a party. Sometimes it was a correction no longer requiring your attention. After the ceremony, she walked through the library alone. In the children's room, a little girl sat cross-legged by the window, reading with her mouth slightly open in concentration. Near the entrance, an older man asked a librarian how to apply for a housing benefit online. A group of teenagers occupied the reading steps as if they had owned them for years. Audrey watched them and felt the quiet arrive again. This time, it did not feel enormous. It felt inhabited. That evening, she returned home, opened the garden door, and let the cool air into the kitchen. Rain began just after sunset, gentle against the glass. For a moment, she waited to see if the sound would pull her backward. It did not. It was only rain. Ordinary. Clean. Hers. Marcus had thought he was replacing a wife. Livia had thought she was receiving a house. Both had misunderstood the structure. Audrey had never been the apron, the chair, the earrings, the wine, or the key. She was the architect. And once she stopped preserving a marriage built on theft, envy, and performance, she designed a life no one could enter without permission. Later, people would ask whether she regretted not walking into the kitchen that night. Audrey always answered honestly, no. Had she walked in, she would have won an argument. By walking away, she won the whole structure. There is a difference. An argument gives pain a voice. A plan gives pain an exit. And sometimes the strongest woman in the room is not the one who screams when she sees the betrayal. Sometimes she is the one who records 42 seconds, steps back into the rain, and waits until the people who underestimated her are standing exactly where the truth can find them. Chapter 13. The city tried to turn Audrey into a headline. For 3 weeks after the library opened, reporters called her office with the same hungry angle dressed in different clothes. Architect betrayed by husband builds revenge library. Famous designer takes back project from cheating spouse. Wife wins after mistress key scandal. Audrey declined every interview that reduced a public building to a private wound. Elise told her this was noble and deeply inconvenient for publicity. Nina said the numbers did not require personal confession. Clara said silence was legally elegant. Samuel said nothing, which was his way of agreeing with everyone at once. Then Marcus made the mistake of trying to rewrite the story. It began with a podcast, not a major one, a business redemption show with soft lighting, expensive microphones, and a host who spoke in the gentle tone people use when they are about to let a man explain why betrayal was actually complicated. Marcus appeared in a navy sweater instead of a suit. He looked tired, human, stripped down. Someone had advised him well. Audrey did not watch it at first. Elise did. She called Audrey at 7 a.m. and said, "I am choosing not to commit crimes before breakfast, but I need you to see this." Audrey opened the link at her kitchen table. Rain tapped lightly against the windows. On screen, Marcus leaned toward the microphone. "I made mistakes," he said. The host nodded with solemn appetite. "But I think what people never saw was the emotional imbalance in that marriage. Audrey is brilliant. No one can deny that, but brilliance can become control. I spent years feeling like a guest in my own life." Audrey watched without blinking. Marcus continued. The project became her entire identity. There was no space for partnership. "I am not proud of how I handled my loneliness, but loneliness is real. Men are not often allowed to say they felt erased." Elise's text arrived. "Please note my restraint." The host asked whether he still respected Audrey. "Of course," Marcus said. "I will always respect what she built. I only wish she had not chosen public destruction over private healing." Audrey paused the video. There it was. The old strategy in new clothes. He was not denying the facts. Facts were too well documented now. Instead, he was trying to make context foggy. He wanted the world to see the video, the emails, the invoices, and still wonder whether Audrey's competence had somehow driven him into dishonesty. It was clever. Not clever enough. By 9, Clara called. "Do you want to respond?" "No." "Good." Audrey looked out at the garden. "But Harborline should." Clara went quiet. Audrey continued. "Not to him. To the idea that accountability is cruelty when it happens to a charming man." That afternoon, Vale Atelier released a short statement. Harborline Commons remains committed to transparent governance, public benefit, and ethical stewardship. Accountability is not public destruction. It is the minimum standard for anyone asking to shape a city. No names. No insults. No emotional explanation. The statement spread faster than the podcast clip. By evening, planners, architects, urbanists, and community organizers were reposting it. Women used it under stories about workplaces, families, marriages, and committees where the person who caused the damage called the documentation of that damage unfair. Accountability is not public destruction became the line. Marcus had wanted sympathy. He had given Audrey language. 2 days later, he sent a private email. You always knew how to make me look small. Audrey read it once. Then she forwarded it to Clara and did not answer. The real final blow did not come from Audrey. It came from the city. At the annual Urban Futures Forum that winter, Harborline Commons received the Civic Repair Award. Audrey had not campaigned for it. In fact, she had tried to send Samuel to accept it. Samuel refused on the grounds that he had already worn a tie twice that year and would not be bullied by architecture. So Audrey went. The forum took place in a glass auditorium downtown, filled with developers, planners, civic leaders, academics, donors, and journalists. A year earlier, Marcus would have worked a room like that with effortless charm. Now Audrey walked through it without looking for him. People approached her carefully. Some congratulated her. Some mentioned the library. Several women said thank you in a way that clearly was not only about buildings. Near the coffee station, a young architect stopped her. Ms. Vale, she said, nervous enough to twist the strap of her bag. I just wanted to say I was in a meeting last week and a senior partner tried to present my model as his own. I heard your voice in my head saying paperwork before poetry. Audrey blinked. The young woman rushed on. So I opened the version history on the screen. In front of everyone. Audrey felt something in her chest open. What happened? He said I was aggressive. Of course. But the client asked me to finish the presentation. Audrey smiled. Then you were accurate. The young woman laughed, half relieved, half tearful. That moment stayed with Audrey longer than the award did. Later, when she stood on stage beneath white lights, the glass trophy in her hand felt less important than the fact that somewhere, someone had opened a file instead of swallowing humiliation. Audrey looked out across the auditorium. I used to think architecture was about making places beautiful enough to be loved, she said. I was wrong. Beauty matters, but it is not enough. A beautiful building can still exclude. A beautiful marriage can still conceal contempt. A beautiful story can still hide stolen labor. The room became still. She continued. What matters is structure. Who holds access? Who signs the documents? Who gets named? Who gets protected? Who is asked to stay quiet so someone else's version of the room can remain comfortable? She paused. Harborline Commons taught me that repair is not gentle work. It requires excavation. It requires removing contaminated soil. It requires telling the truth about what happened on the land before anyone pours a new foundation. Elise, seated near the front, lowered her head. Nina stared at the stage with shining eyes. Samuel looked sternly at a point above Audrey's shoulder, which meant he was trying not to cry. Audrey's voice softened. That is true of cities. It is also true of lives. Applause began before she finished. She waited, then lifted one hand. So if you're standing inside a life where someone keeps calling the cracks character, please look again. If someone tells you the door they opened without permission is proof you are unloving for changing the lock, please change it anyway. If someone uses your work, your home, your patience, or your silence as material for their own ambition, remember this. You are allowed to inspect the foundation. The applause rose again, this time fuller. Audrey stepped back from the microphone. She did not feel triumphant. She felt aligned. There was a difference. Triumph still faced the people who hurt you. Alignment faced forward. That night, after the forum, Audrey returned home and placed the Civic Repair Award on the kitchen table beside the library key. It looked strange there. Too formal for the room. Too shiny beside the teapot. She laughed to herself, carried it to the pantry, and set it on a shelf behind the flour. Elise would scold her later. Audrey did not care. The object was not the victory. The victory was the green kitchen no longer holding its breath. The victory was the public library full on a rainy Tuesday. The victory was the young architect opening the version history in front of a client. The victory was Audrey's own hand reaching for the window latch at night without remembering Marcus's face behind the glass. Spring came slowly. Harborline's clinic opened next. Then the market hall. Then the first affordable apartments, with balconies angled toward the river and laundry rooms bright enough that no one had to fold sheets under fluorescent gloom. Audrey attended every opening. Not always on stage. Sometimes she stood at the back, watching people enter spaces that had once existed only in drawings. One afternoon, she saw a little boy press both palms against the library glass and shout to his mother that the sun was inside. Audrey carried that sentence with her for days. The sun was inside. After everything, that was what remained. Not Marcus. Not Livia. Not the podcast. Not the kitchen window. Light, entering through a structure that held. On the second anniversary of the night she came home early, Audrey did not mark the date intentionally. She only realized it near midnight while washing a mug at the sink. Rain was falling again, soft and steady. She looked through the window. The garden was dark. The path glistened. The lavender bent under the weather and rose again when the wind passed. Audrey dried the mug and turned off the light. There was no speech this time. No lesson arranged neatly for an audience. No sharp line worthy of being shared. There was only the quiet fact of her own life continuing. And perhaps that was the deepest revenge of all. Not destruction. Continuation. Not proving she was irreplaceable to the man who tried to replace her. Becoming unavailable to anyone who needed her diminished in order to feel whole. Subscribe for more stories about betrayal, quiet strength, and the moment a woman finally takes back the life she built.